Hey everybody, this is Chris with OverclockersClub. I'm back again with some more reviews. We already looked at the MasterAir G100M earlier. The review I just finished up is the MasterAir MA410M. Those two are both air coolers, the G100M and this guy here, which is this one right here. But next we've got a couple of all-in-one liquid coolers, the MasterLiquid ML120L and the MasterLiquid ML240L. They're both RGB coolers with some neat features, so let's take a look at them. So we'll go over the details here, features, components, all that good stuff. I've already been using the ML120 for some other testing, so that's why it's already out of the box. But let's zoom in a little closer and see what's going on. So we'll take a look at the ML120 first. All of your all-in-one coolers, it really doesn't matter who the manufacturer is, pretty much have the same basic components, and that would be the pump, the fan, sometimes two fans if you have a push-pull, and then the radiator and your coolant lines here. And they're all pretty much the same. A lot of times there's some different technology that goes into the pumps. Different manufacturers like to claim they have some innovative designs. For example, Cooler Master talks about their dual chamber pump design, and I looked around a little bit and didn't see anything about what exactly was going on. Then I remembered from my old MasterLiquid Pro cooler review, which is where these images are from, it talked about their dual chamber. So it talks about, it says here, we stacked an extra chamber on top and engineered it so that the cold stuff can go in but the hot stuff can't go back up. So apparently that was a problem. I don't know, maybe not. And then the next image here kind of shows it a little more, so you can kind of see the separation of the hot and cold. I'm assuming it's the same pump or the same basic design for this MasterLiquid ML series, but that's kind of what's going on there. So it talks about a quieter drive and performance boost and a lifespan. So they've got some improvements in there. So I'm pretty sure that's probably the same technology with this pump here, the dual chamber design that was used on an earlier cooler that I reviewed, which was the MasterLiquid Pro 280. So anyway, back to how these things function, and all the manufacturers pretty much do it the same way. Your radiator is actually kind of broken into two sections here. It looks like it's one piece, and it is, but the way this works, we look on the back, one of these lines is the intake and the other is the exit. I'm not sure which. We'll be able to tell pretty quickly when we put some heat to it, and you can see with the thermal camera one side will be warmer than the other. But anyway, the coolant's going to come in through one of these lines, and half of this chamber here, there's a baffle so that the coolant is forced to go through half of the radiator, comes down to the end where it makes a 180-degree turn and comes back through the other side of the radiator before it goes to the exit. And the baffle is here because if there wasn't, your coolant can just make a straight path from the inlet directly to the exit, and it would never really have, the resistance would be such that it wouldn't really go through the rest of the radiator. So it's forced to go around like that. And the thermal camera will basically show when we heat this up, one side will be noticeably warmer, and you can actually see the division there in the middle of the radiator. So the RGB systems for both of these coolers should be exactly the same, and it consists of, let me kind of walk through these. You have this little RGB controller, and we got our power that comes in here, whoops, through the Molex. You plug that into one of your Molex connectors on your power supply. We got 3 buttons here for function and speed. Over here on this end, we've got one of these little connectors, and these come out. I've already pushed it in there, and they're kind of snug, so I don't want to damage it trying to get it out of there. Then you have this additional connector here. Now this guy actually is a 3-into-1, or 1-into-3, however you want to look at it. But one end here will plug into your RGB controller, and there's a little arrow on the back of each one of these, and you line the arrows up. That way you get the right orientation. So now I got the single lead going into the RGB controller right there. And then we have these 3. Now these go to, the first item would be like the fan, and again you line up the little arrows there. And then we have another one here for the RGB on the pump. And again, line up the arrows, plug that in. And then we have a third one. This is an extra one in case you had an additional fan, an additional RGB fan. You could just plug it right into this extra connector. The remaining cables are the 4-pin PWM for the fan itself. That's power to the fan. And then we have a 3-pin connector, which is power to the pump. So those are your connectors, cables, RGB control, and again, that should be the same for both of these systems. Instructions on these really are pretty straightforward. They walk you through how to assemble this bracket that goes behind the motherboard, and that's what your whole cooler attaches to from the top. Your socket coverage is all your latest sockets, your LGA 2066, 1151, and then your AMD, your latest AM4 socket. This basically walks you through your hardware list so you can check off in the box, make sure you're not missing anything. And it shows you for AMD and Intel all of the steps to install it. Don't forget to peel the label off the bottom of the cooler. There's a protective label there. Apply your thermal paste, and this kind of walks you through, depending upon which system, where these little studs get mounted. Attach the brackets to the pump. Put your bracket on the back of the motherboard, and then carefully tighten the top fasteners down in a certain order there, specific order. And then you're pretty much ready to go. So since I already had the ML120 open, but I haven't really gone through this one yet, we'll use this as the guinea pig. One thing I'll point out here, a lot of the modern motherboards now, check if you're interested in that, they do support the different RGB, and each one has their own little system. So you can plug your RGB systems, your peripherals, into the motherboard, and you can synchronize all that. So this talks about your Asus Aurora Sync, your ASRock RGB. Gigabyte has their own RGB Fusion, and MSI has their Mystic Light Sync. So that's a nice feature. And you'll get this open. And obviously I have not opened this one yet. There's a little bag of the desiccant, keep the moisture down. Fan speed is I believe 650 to 2000 RPMs. So these are the two RGB 120 millimeter fans. Again, they'll have two connectors, two cables. One's a 4-pin PWM, which you will use for fan control, speed control, and then there's the RGB little connector there. And again, there's a little arrow on one end there, and that's what you use when you connect it to the system. Instruction set. And again, this should really be almost identical to the 120. There's the radiator. I like the way they do this formed shell there to keep everything from getting knocked around in shipment. Bag off there, and here's a little sticker you want to peel off before you install the system. That's meant to protect the finish. Make sure this doesn't get dinged or nicked up. That machine copper base plate there on the cooler. Now these lines on both of these pumps here, they can actually pivot a little bit, so just in case you need to move your lines around, they're a little stiff, but they will pivot. There's a little O-ring in there that keeps the thing sealed up so you don't get any leakage. So we look again at the cooler radiator, and we've got our screw mounting provisions for our two 120 millimeter radiators. And again, the tank configuration is the same way. One of these is the intake, one's the outlet. There's a baffle here at this end, so all of your coolant goes from one end of the cooler, makes a U-turn, and then goes down the other side. So we'll go ahead and start getting these installed to the motherboard. So here's the MA410M from the last test. We'll go ahead and get it removed. Temporarily I'll mount it on my little testing motherboard tray there. This is a Z87 motherboard with a 4770K CPU. So first test we'll do here is with the ML120L. Alright, so we have the system powered up again. That's the Z77 motherboard with a 4770K. We're going to run on overclock at 4.2 gigahertz using Prime 95 to stress it. So there's the RGB fan doing its thing. Here's the top of the pump. As you can see, it's synchronized with what's going on with the fan. Got the fan propped up there on a Cooler Master MWE750 power supply, because everywhere else I tried to put it, the hoses did not like it, and it seemed to be most comfortable there. Perched on the power supply, so that's where it'll sit for now. So now we're looking at the system at idle, and you can see even at idle, one side is just a little warmer than the other. Not by much. It is more obvious though once we get the overclock cranked up. There's the intake side. And you can see the two tubes there. They're going to be similar in temperature there. I can focus on them. So about 32, almost 33 on that one, and this one is just a little warmer. So that would tell me the one on the right is the hot water coming from, or hot coolant coming from the pump, and the other side is the exit side there, returning the coolant back to the pump. Okay, so now we have the overclock cranked up to 4.2 gigahertz, and you can see the distinct difference in temperature. You can definitely see where the hot coolant is coming in at the bottom. It's going up to the top where it makes the U-turn, and when it comes back down, more heat is extracted and we see the temperature cooler on that side than we do on the right hand side. And if we look at the cooling lines here, lines coming to and from the pump, we should be able to see that one is noticeably warmer than the other. So that one is 37.5. Go to the other line, and it's a couple degrees cooler. So that just shows you how the heat is handled on these all-in-one coolers, how the radiator moves the coolant through. So now we'll go ahead and put the ML240L on here, and we should see pretty much similar results. So that was the ML120L. This is the ML240L. It's just pretty much double the size. We're using the same pump, same fans, except we have two fans instead of one. So we'll get this system installed and see what the numbers look like. And there we have the ML240L all installed and running. Come around and look at the other side. And it has the same 120 millimeter RGB fans. The control system is the same between the 120 and the 240. The braided lines here are the same. That's a nice feature. And the way they do it's almost like a shrink fit there over the fittings on the end. Also nice. Radiator dimensions really just double the size of the 120 and you get the 240. And we have the mounting holes on both sides for fans, so you can put the 120 millimeter fans on both sides if you like. You'd have to buy two more fans separately, but that would give you a push-pull configuration. Now what will be interesting to see is that even though we have double the capacity and two fans, is how much influence that has since we're using the same pump. So we have the same flow rate, the same volume, or I should say the same amount of fluid going across the CPU to remove the heat, but what we have is really double the capacity, so it'll take longer to warm up the fluid because we have essentially twice the fluid. And when we put the heat to it, we should see temperatures that are a little lower than we saw before. It'll be interesting to see exactly where that is. So let's take a look. So now we're using the thermal camera to take a look at the 240 millimeter radiator. System is at idle. And I'm not really seeing much temperature differential from one side of the radiator to the other. Really not much to see. And when we come over here and look at the pump, it's relatively cool compared to the VRM over here. And then when we look at the lines, you can see how cool the lines are because they're showing up in blue. So if we look at the difference between the two lines, if I can get it right to, yeah, there's really not much difference. So we'll get the heat on it and see the difference. Again, we're using an old Z77 motherboard with a 4770K. We'll go ahead and crank this up to 4.2 gigahertz and take another look. So now we have the overclock cranked up, 4.2 gigahertz, and you can see there's a more distinct temperature difference here. This is going to be the side where the hot coolant is coming in, and this will be the exit side, so you can see there's a little bit of difference there in temperature. A couple degrees. And again, the coolant comes in here at the top right and makes its way down the radiator on the left hand side here, and then it shifts over to the right and makes the return trip up to the top, at which point it's going to travel back to the pump. And if we look at our cooling lines here, let's see if we can see a difference. That one's around 29, a little over. No, they're about the same. I would have expected to see one of these a little warmer than the other. I guess maybe it is. They're 32. Just depends on where you. Let's try it over here. Okay, this side's around 30.5, 30.0, somewhere around there. And this side is, yeah, okay, yeah, just a little bit cooler. But our system temperatures are around 73 average, 74, which is about 8 to 9 degrees cooler than the 120 millimeter version. And you can see the VRM there is a little bit warmer when we're under a load. So the fans are cranked up, full speed, a little over 2200 RPMs. And you can see definitely which side is hot and which side's a little cooler. So performance-wise, there was a little bit of temperature separating these two as my table moves. There we go. Okay. We had about 8 to 9 degrees separating the two. So this one came in around 82, 81, 83, and this one came in around 73, 74, right around there. So we had close to 10 degrees of separation. So where I'm going with that is value. So if you look at the price between these two, and right now I checked on Amazon, this one's going for around $52 to $55, and this one, the 240L, is listed around $59. So there's very little dollar-wise separating these two coolers. So if your case is large enough and you can handle it, the 240 would be a good choice. If you have a smaller case or you just don't have the room in there, the 120 would be fine too. They can both move a fair amount of heat out of your system. So the other features that I like, again, we have the braided lines, we have the RGB, of course, and you have the ability, if your motherboard supports RGB, and a lot of modern motherboards that are gaming oriented do support the RGB, so this system would be right at home with that. So this is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.